Kia ora koutou, good morning everybody, and a very warm welcome to you all to the first Audit and Risk Committee meeting for this triennium. A special welcome to the new council members of this Audit and Risk Committee, and a welcome back to the ones who were on the Audit and Risk Committee from the previous triennium. I'd like Councillor Robinson, please, to open with Karakia.
Thank you, Chair. Whakatau taho ki te uru. Whakatau taho ki te tonga. Kia makinakina ki uta. Kia mataratara ki tai. E hi aka ana ti atakura. He tio, he huka, he ho hu. Ti hei mori ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. Moving into the agenda, we have no apologies at this time. And I'd also just like to welcome the other councillors who are in attendance at the meeting. You're welcome. Good to have you here. And just remind you, though, of standing orders that you obviously don't have any speaking rights automatically and or voting rights in the meeting, but very welcome for you to come and attend and observe the meeting. Okay, there were no apologies. Are there any conflicts of interest with any of the matters that are on the agenda items today? No? There have been no public forum deputations or petitions. Is there any extraordinary business? I'm not aware of any. Does anyone have any extraordinary business? No. And we have received no notices of motions. The minutes of the previous meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee, similar to other minutes of committees with the change post-election, have been reviewed and approved by the Chief Executive and myself. However, I would like to put the motion that the Audit and Risk Committee receives those confirmed minutes from the 1st of October 2025. Are there any questions? Will I have a mover, please? Thank you. A seconder? Thank you, Nettles. Councillor Lamont. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, there has been a change to the agenda. We have some external parties, and so we moved the agenda around just to make sure the timing of that worked. So I'd like to move into the first report item for information, and welcome to the table Chantel from Audit New Zealand, and Grant can come, our General Manager, Finance and Assurance, to introduce the reports from Audit New Zealand.
Yeah, so this report is for 24-25, following on from a previous Audit and Risk Committee meeting, and of course has been approved at Council as well. So this is catching up on the reporting and what was found, and it's at a high level by design for governance. And of course there's more detailed information at the back to tell you where things are at with previous recommendations and things. But I'll hand over to Chantel. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I know some of this might be a repeat for some people and not for others, and we did sort of speak to some of these points at the council meeting when the adoption took place, but I'll go through them. There's also sort of a summary in terms of the outcome and our assessment of the overall environment and process of the audit, which I'll speak to. So we issued a modified audit report for ECAN on the 19th of November. We were satisfied that the financial statements presented fairly the council's activity, but we did have a qualification on one of the performance measures around the percentage of stop banks, river berms and fairways of the 6 major flood protection and control schemes that were inspected annually, where we weren't able to get sufficient audit evidence that all of the inspections happened within the year under review. We did identify misstatements through the audit process, and those were corrected by management. The only item that remained on the letter of representation was a above trivial potential misstatement on the resource consents. In terms of the focus areas of our audit plan, we looked at the revaluation of infrastructure assets, and we were comfortable that the process followed was sound and that what was recorded in the annual report was materially correct. We have one new low-risk recommendation that we identified, which was for management to investigate the ownership of culverts. It was not considered a material issue, but something to look at in the future. We worked through the evaluation of forestry assets. Once again, we were comfortable with the approach and methodology followed by the council and the valuer, and we had no recommendations on that side. In terms of the asset impairment considerations, we worked through asset impairments for the year, and although there was a change in presentation of one of the assessments made around the treatment of Karakia land reserve, we were comfortable that the annual report at the end of the year reflected the appropriate accounting treatment. We also looked at the risk of management override and internal control. This is a risk that's considered a significant risk for all entities that undergo an audit, and we look at it from a range of audit procedures to identify and respond to potential indicators of management override of controls, and we had no items that we needed to bring to the attention of the governance structures on that front. In terms of matters identified during the audit, we've spoken quite extensively around the qualification on service measure 19, included in the report is management's response to that, which is acceptable. We also had a look at service measure 2, which was the percentage of resource consents, which you've spoken about, which was the sort of final above trivial variance that we included on the letter of representation. During the previous long-term plan, the council performed a program to uplift the nature and quality of its service measures. This year is the first year that they reported against this new suite of measurements and targets. And considering this context, most of the high and medium recommendations that we've made to management were on the statement of performance, which I think is understandable. We worked well with management within the organisation to obtain as many different ways of supporting the outcomes that are included in the performance information. But unfortunately, there was just the one qualification where there were no alternative procedures that we could perform. Council has engaged well with Audit on the audit of the statement of performance information and have been open to improvements that we've recommended. We believe the process followed with Audit this year, the implementation of the recommendation and Council's commitment to accountability and transparency provide a strong foundation for future reporting periods. If we look at the financial statements and service performance information, we believed all of the judgmental areas, all of the judgmental areas were balanced in terms of outcome. We didn't find one where there was overly optimistic assumptions made or very cautious assumptions made. They were very balanced in terms of the assessment. We also make an assessment of the quality and timeliness of information provided for audit. I know kind of when you look at this, it feels, if you look at the traffic light system of green, orange, and red, it feels like there's a lot of oranges. But if you read what the orange means, which is quality and timeliness were of an acceptable standard but with some minor deficiencies, I think it's a fair reflection to show that the council is actually doing quite well on that front, with only one area of attention, which is around the performance information, which we've spoken to. I think that is sort of all I'd like to highlight out of that report, but happy to take any questions or anything with regards to the report.
Thank you, Chantal. Grant, do you want to add anything before we open it for questions from a management point of view?
No, nothing further from me. We've had a lot of discussion on it in other areas, so all good.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to you and your team for the audit work and the comprehensive reporting that we have from the audit. It's very useful information, and thank you for talking to that too. I think pulling out the key matters around the compliance, albeit that one issue that we had with one of the performance measures. Okay, thank you for that. Are there any questions before I put the motion? Is there any questions specifically of Chantal or Grant? Sorry, Joss? Yes, we'll come back to the plan, I think, after this. Yeah. So any questions specifically on the 2024-25 audit and reporting before we ask to talk about the plan for the 25-26 audit? No? Okay. Thank you. We'll move on then, Chantal, if it's okay with you, to talk about the new plan.
Thank you. So this one we have issued in draft. What we've done is we're trying to, as part of this process, get through the planning earlier to try and allow the council to focus on where we will be looking and making sure that we have identified the same risks and that our response is appropriate. Most of these are quite similar to what you would have seen in prior years around the valuation of infrastructure, which this year is likely to be a fair value assessment, so not a significant amount of work, but we will look at it from the perspective of making sure that that value fairly reflects what value it should have within the annual report. The valuation of forestry assets, we look at every year because that's a requirement. It has to have a full valuation every year. And the asset impairment considerations we always look at because obviously with weather events and other instances that happen every year, we need to make sure that any impairment to the assets held by council are appropriately reviewed and taken into consideration. We also look at the risk of management override of internal control, which, as I said, is a standard risk, significant risk that's included in every audit. We make sure that there's no bias in terms of the information that's presented in terms of the annual report. One of the other areas that we will be looking at for the year under review is obviously some of the reform measures that have been announced recently and the impacts that that could have on ECAN and the presentation in the annual report. Those will be open to engagement as we go through the process and as we understand what those implications are going to be. The other item, just to sort of bring to everyone's attention, is the performance information. These are slightly different to what we would have included last year. So what we've taken into account is sorry, I'm just bringing it up here. Overall, there's one more measure that we will be looking at in total, although there has been a shift. So we've dropped one off, which was this year's service measure 1. Which we don't believe is material any longer. We have replaced that with another item that's linked to transport as a significant service of council, and we've also included the DIA mandatory measure for flood protection, which was an additional disclosure that was made in last year's annual report, but not selected as a material measure. We've got sort of interim timetable, and this is in draft, and we'll work with council on those dates, but this is the anticipated timeframe that we're working on. We've also been engaging well with management in terms of trying to bring some work forward in the audit process so that we take some of the heat out of the year-end audit review. I think we've got some really clear and good ideas in terms of where that can happen, and council is absolutely engaged in terms of supporting us in making that happen. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Again, just offer you, Grant, any opportunity to talk if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick word. Also, I think the benefit of the next one will be meeting the statutory deadline. We won't have election in the middle of it, so that'll be good too, right? Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you. Again, before I put the motion, because I'm going to put the two motions together around receiving both the 24-25 report and the draft plan. Any questions? Yes, Carolyn.
My only comment, Mr. Chair, in light of the both the report and the narrative from Audit, is whether we can maybe strengthen the resolution. That I think it's worth noting that it's a positive report. There's a high level of assurance provided by the report as to the underlying robustness, and whether it's worth this committee recognising that this is quite a passive set of recommendations. And I was just thinking something along the lines of commends the level of assurance provided by this report. It's formally recorded.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to do that. I'll add that wording into a potential into the motion. Any other questions from anyone? I just have one actually of management team. I think having looked at the audit plan and looked at the target or the focus areas, particularly around the performance measures, are management comfortable that we currently do have systems and procedures in place to be able to report against those, and we'll be able to demonstrate to audit that they are auditable measures?
Yeah, and I think having that early messaging we've had from the last audit and the findings from that is helping us prepare. Like already we've fixed GIS, for example, and river inspections. That's a classic example.
Yeah.
So getting that readiness, and I know the strategy and planning team are doing a great job of getting things lined up well. Yeah. Carmen's going to add.
Yeah, welcome.
Kia ora, good morning. So, yes, we've been working with the audit team on how we can bring forward some of the requirements or understanding of what's going to be involved in auditing each service measure. So a good example is service measure 2 around the consents, processing, the timeframes for that. The audit sample was 46 consents this last year. It was over 150 hours of staff time to pull together the documentation for that sample. So that's an area where we could potentially understand what that sample will be earlier and have staff prepare that information in advance at the end of the financial year. So that's one area where we think we can make improvements and make it more manageable for both for Audit New Zealand and for staff.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And yes, I mean, it's really just based on the learnings from last year that if there is a performance measure where the ability to audit the performance measure is going to be an issue, the sooner we know that, the better, to see if we can make sure we're taking any actions and hopefully avoid the same issue we had around qualification. Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you. I guess with all the flux of local government reform, RM reform, do you, as an auditor, have a view as to how you might handle some of these issues that are going to arise as we go forward, whether it be consenting or a bunch of our performance indicators that may not be capable of being achieved, or we don't know? Do you have a view as to how that might be handled over possibly the next 12 months won't be so much, but after that there could be all manner of flux?
From our perspective, obviously we work towards when those final decisions are made, and we'll work with management in terms of making sure that there's a fair reflection in the annual report. So I think it will be around the narrative that linked to a lot of these items. If there's anything with regard to transfers or anything to that extent, we will make sure that we're working with management to determine, hopefully in advance of when it becomes critical, what steps need to take place to ensure that the annual report fairly reflects the situation at year end. It's a little bit of crystal ball gazing at the moment, so we won't be able to say definitively yes, no, this is where we're going. But I think the key thing is going to be the communication between auditors and management in terms of making sure that we're assessing all risks so that those are dealt with prior to the financial year end. Okay,
thank you. Any further questions at this stage? Okay, there being no questions, we're going to put a slightly amended resolution to those that are in the paper, and I've confirmed with Giles that we're happy that management provide an amended resolution, which is about to pop up on screen now. So further to your point, Carolyn, the motion is that we receive the Audit New Zealand report to Council on the annual report for the year ended 30 June 2025 and endorses management's comments and commends the level of assurance provided by the report. And then the second is that we receive the Audit New Zealand plan, the draft Audit New Zealand plan it actually is. Sorry, can we just add draft into that? The draft Audit New Zealand plan for the 2025-2026 year. Do I have someone to move that motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Seconded, Councillor Lamont. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Thank you. And thank you again to you and your team, Chantal, for your ongoing work and assurance that you're providing for us. Thank you, Grant. Okay, the next item on the agenda, again, just a slight move, 9.2. I'd like to welcome David Walker to the table to talk us through the Bancorp Treasury Services report. For those that are new to the committee, this is a regular item that we asked David to come and talk us through A, the report, and B, a discussion or an opportunity for discussion around anything else we may be wanting to discuss while we have Bancorp, our Treasury and economic experts in the room. So once we have the report ready to go on screen, I'll hand over to you, David, and then I'll let you speak, and then we'll take any questions, of which I know there are some. Thank you.
I was just asking if this is a public record, just in case of any questions that come up. So just for shaping answers to any questions that come up later on.
Yes, thank you.
Look, just while waiting for this to come up, the first section we'll talk about is who, how, why sort of thing, and then we'll talk about the economic sort of stuff. I think one of the questions was what's the right sort of frequency to reporting back to yourselves, and kind of sort of, I suppose, in a broader sense, our role as well. So just on that, I know we're getting there. I just want to quickly talk about Bancorp itself. It's not an organisation that you find a name on the back of buses or, you know, we have naming rights for big buildings, that sort of thing. So I just want to talk about that. I'll keep talking while the technology catches up.
How long?
No.
2 to 5 minutes. Okay, look, we might just have a small adjournment if we can, please, just because we're live streaming this, just to pause so we can get the technology right, and then we'll come back. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Meeting is now recommenced, and just noting that Councillor Lamont has had to leave for personal reasons, and so as an apology for the remainder of the meeting. Thank you, David. Welcome again to you, and we'll hand over to you to talk through your presentation.
Right, take two. So explaining a little bit, first bit's a little bit about Bancorp. Again, reasonably low profile sort of entity outside the sector, but let's just go through that. Okay, so this is a quick snapshot of sort of the clients that we deal with. Bancorp is actually the largest Treasury advisory company in Australasia. In terms of the local authority sector, we've got something like, I think 65% of all the local authorities. Actually have the bulk of the new water entities that are coming through as well. So, and we're pretty deep in terms of the infrastructure sector as well. So we're a good sort of go-to for just sort of in terms of what's going on in the sector and just for news. And because we're so such a large role in the sector, people like LGFA are pretty keen to talk to us, and likewise we're keen to talk to them, and the same with the credit rating agencies. And there's a bit on that we'll get to a little bit later on as well. Just so you know, Bancorp is just a little bit more than me. That's an example of basically the bigger team as well. So again, sorry, go match the bus analogy, but if I get run over by a bus, there's a few other people that can take over my place. And my colleague Miles O'Connor is based here in Christchurch as well. Okay, for those that are new or newish, I just quickly run through kind of what Bancorp's role is. Look, I'm not going to go through it line by line, but basically our role is to look out for you in terms of financial risk management, things like Treasury policy. You focus on your interest rates, focus on your LGFA covenants. Up until recently, you had debt of circa of $100 million, so it's well worth doing properly. As part of that lending through the LGFA, you've got some covenants you're supposed to comply with, and obviously there's a broad range of products that we can use to try and get the best possible outcomes that we can for yourselves. And I think it has worked out very well. And just some bottom points there as well, working capital management. And also too, I think one of the things I've enjoyed with this council over the years, there's just been some ad hoc topics we've had to help with over the years, which is I always welcome. Okay, so I think one of the questions is, what's the right sort of time for us to sort of have these sort of discussions? Interesting enough, some councils, look, it's just an every 4-year thing when we get new councillors, but we just basically talking to, if you like, the newbies to explain about what the role is, and sort of almost we do sort of a sort of financial markets 101. Some councils basically do it monthly. There's no right or wrong answer in terms of that. It's up to you guys to determine how often you kind of want us to report. But I just, as I say, the spectrum is 1 month to 4 years, so you just got to figure out what's best for you. Maybe one of the ways you can think about it is, how material is this to your council? In all honesty, it's probably less material for yourselves. Other councils that we deal with have significantly more levels of debt, and they have weaker credit ratings. So there's a greater requirement to make sure that things are run as well as they possibly can. So I'm not trying to pass the buck on that, but I'm just saying for some councils it's more material than others. Rightio. I'm hoping this is where we'll get some good questions that will come in. So we'll just run straight into the economic update again for the new members here. So again, we just sort of welcome questions, and the whole purpose of, one of the large purposes of this sort of chat is if you guys have things on your mind, it's a good opportunity economics-wise just to ask questions. So let's just focus on the Reserve Bank. 26th November, they cut the rates 25 basis points from 250 to 225. It was a split vote. It saw a sharp market reaction. Probably shouldn't have in my perspective, but maybe it's just the way that the market was positioned, and we're getting towards the end of the year as well, where the market's a bit thinner than otherwise. Actually, coincidentally, the day that the Reserve Bank statement came out, Aussie had a shocking inflation number that came out, and it basically saw a situation where their market sold off significantly and led to some banks over there talking about a need for an immediate cash rate hike over there. Again, just sort of on that point, the Reserve Bank has done a lot. It was August 24 when the cash rate was 5.5%, so it's quite remarkable that in the course of just over a year, we had the cash rate cut from 5.50 to 2.25. Again, talking about our neighbours across the ditch, their cash rate's 3. Us in terms of ECAN, the typical pause in monetary policy, i.e. once it gets to its lows, how long does it stay there? I looked at some graphs and the sort of stuff we talk about. It's generally a minimum of 9 months. So all things being equal, unless there's significant economic changes or unexpected happens, the cash rate's likely to stay here for probably a minimum of, as I say, 6 to 9 months. We think the market reaction is likely overdone. And I find it interesting from a media perspective how the economy has gone from being in really, really poor shape to being in really, really good shape. And again, for this region, something that I sort of point out is there's been a really significant pullback in dairy prices as well, which has been one of the big positives for the South Island, which probably won't be there to the same extent next year. Looking across to the US and just sort of again, possibly we can cover that later, but what happens in the US matters. There's really strong correlation between US long-term rates and our long-term rates, and I'm sure I've had this conversation with existing councillors many times. The Fed did come out and cut 25 basis points this week. And then beyond that, we've got politics in terms of Trump is planning on reshaping the US Federal Reserve. Obviously, he's talking about getting rid of their chairman and replacing some Fed members with people who are more sympathetic with his view. And I think this last point here is something that I was just mentioning before in terms of it doesn't matter till it matters, but I think the market is just now refocusing on the fact that the US deficit, even with the significant increase in tariffs, is increasing by $6 billion a day. Just let that soak in for a moment, $6 billion a day. Now that's a big increase in the deficit. That's all got to be funded. That all has impacts for US interest rates, particularly longer term interest rates, which then feeds into our rates. So part of what we've seen in terms of the market reaction in the last couple of weeks has been just an increasing concern globally about longer term interest rates. So not necessarily in terms of concerns about New Zealand specifically, but because of international correlations, we get buffeted around by that.
Sorry, Dave, can I just pause you there? Chairman Swiggs, did you want to ask a question in relation to that part of the presentation?
Yeah, no, so that's a very good segue into, I had a question when I was reading this around those long-term interest rates and where you're thinking as a professional in this space, obviously with our debt and our maturities of our debt, and also for our thinking of planning for annual plan, long-term plan, we've got some assumptions of inflation and debt. Do you see this as like a dead cat bounce scenario and it might peel back a little bit, or do you see this trend? I mean, it's a significant uplift in the last couple of weeks in the swap rates, especially the long-term ones.
Yeah, again, a good question. I think I made the point at the last meeting is that when we had particularly the OCR below 3%, to me that was kind of rates in sort of bonus territory. And I and we, in terms of Bancorp, we see a sort of fair value for New Zealand cash rate between 3 and 3.5%. Sort of below that, you've kind of got the Reserve Bank trying to stimulate the economy. So I think over time we'll move back to that 3.5%. But you already see some of those longer term rates, now sort of nudging sort of 4%, particularly with the LGFO borrowing. So that's the bit that we kind of see is at this point in terms of being overdone, particularly given and particularly given the fact that the cash rate is likely to be anchored where it is for a significant period of times. But what it does mean, it means that in terms of particularly for ECAN, we're certainly now in sort of targeting the dip mode. for interest rates. So look, there's no doubt that volatility that we've seen over recent times will continue, and that sort of knocks interest rates up and down. And so we're just going to perhaps be a little bit more pragmatic in terms of, what targeting we see in terms of rates. Should that significantly change your view in terms of your long-term budgets? The answer is probably not.
Good. That's quite useful. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I have another question here from Councillor Moody.
Thank you. New member on audit and risk, so some basic questions. Three of them. You mentioned LGFA borrowing. Is that like a local government finance authority, or what's that stand for?
Local government funding agency.
So that's the rate that we pay to borrow money, essentially.
Sorry, they're an entity that funds basically all the local authorities in New Zealand, bar the Chatham Islands. So, the AAA rated entity, well regarded as a global best case model in terms of obtaining sort of funding for the local authority market. You're definitely stronger together than weaker apart. Just as an example, you can do 3-month commercial paper funding from the LGFA at a rate of, say, 265. If you went to your friendly bank down the road, that rate would be probably another 1.25% higher than that.
And did you say it's 4%?
When you're looking at some of the longer term rates. So again, one of the advantages with the LGFA is that New Zealand banks typically only provide funding out to 5 years. The LGFA, you can go out 12 years and typically 15 years, depending on what bond maturities they have out there. So again, shorter term rates low, longer term rates very high. So it depends which part of the yield curve you're looking at. And again, just in terms of Financial Markets 101, the Reserve Bank kind of controls the cash rate and rates out to about 2 years. Beyond 2 years, it's kind of, and increasingly as you go further out, it's driven by global factors, particularly the US. So when you're talking about interest rates, you just need to think about what term of interest rates you're thinking about, because they're driven by very, very different factors.
Great, thank you. If I got time for the other two, some basic questions. You mentioned a pullback in dairy prices as a good thing. Did I hear that right?
I'm not sure if I said a pullback in. A pullback in dairy prices is actually helpful it means the economy is less strong. All things being other equal, there's actually less inflationary pressures. So from an interest rate perspective, it's seen as a net positive. But for the region, arguably not. So again, it's a really interesting dilemma, isn't it? Is good dairy prices, strong dairy prices, is that good for New Zealand or bad for New Zealand? But from an interest rate perspective, lower than otherwise dairy prices, it means all other things being equal is helpful for lower interest rates rather than higher interest rates.
Right. My quick looking at the media headlines, I thought they were pretty high. They're around $10, which was a high, but had they contracted a bit? Is that what I'm hearing?
I haven't got the graph with me, but yeah, if you look at global dairy prices, they're back about 30% off their highs.
Thank you. And the final question, you said that all things being equal, New Zealand's interest rates would be higher than Australia's or America's. Briefly, why would that be? Is it just because we've got less credit in the market to loan and stuff?
In general, the US is sort of kind of seen as kind of the global benchmark, and all other countries are priced beyond that. Our credit rating or a risk is generally seen as being slightly worse than the others, but particularly from an offshore investor's point of view, it's kind of thin, a liquid market, and it's a really tricky market if things go bad to get out of as well, because the market's quite a liquid. So there's kind of a lack of liquidity type cost. So you just got to look at it from an overseas investor's point of view. Where would you rather be, the US, Australia, or New Zealand? So that's part of the paradigm that the investors think about.
Great, thank you. Another question from Councillor Ward.
You have any comments on the Japanese bond market?
I wasn't expecting that. In what context were you thinking of?
Just throwing it out there a bit as a wild card.
The Japanese market hasn't. I haven't really focused a lot on that, and hasn't. Interesting though, over times, isn't it? It kind of shows the not the declines of empires, but at one point, the Japanese economy was kind of front of mind. It's really not so at the moment. So in terms of things I think about, it wouldn't make the top 10 list. So I can't really comment.
That's right, thank you, well answered. I think we could carry on, if we're comfortable, we'll carry on with a presentation.
Okay. Hey, so this bit here, it's kind of, this is what I asked if this is kind of on the record comment or not, but again, we talk to the credit rating agency, particularly S&P, quite frequently. But I thought their comments, particularly, I'm not going to cover the regional council part because will know that much more than I. But in terms of the rate caps, I think in general terms, apart from the wording there, the phrase unintended consequences comes to mind. And from a Standard & Poor's and from a credit rating point of view, all things being equal, this means a weaker credit ratings rather than stronger ratings. I've used this phrase too much recently given my work with, and I think has potential to lead to some really, really poor outcomes. But beyond that, I shouldn't say anything more.
Not sure you get too much disagreement around the table anyway, so that's happy. They're happy to move on.
Alrighty. Okay, so this is, again, for perhaps some of the newer members. Environment Canterbury has a Treasury policy which outlines how much fixed and floating it has to have for certain time bands. I think it's, sorry, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but I think you've got a 0 to 2 year time band, a 2 to 4 year time band, and effectively a 4 to 8 year, I think, time band. But effectively, and what we use a combination of LGFA fixed rate bonds and interest rate swaps, potentially interest rate caps and in terms of interest rate swaps, we can either start those now or we can start them in 5 years' time or 6 years' time. We've got a lot of flexibility in terms of what we do. So that's kind of where you are in your profile. Am I? Cool. That's where you are in terms of your profile. You're kind of middle of the bands, and actually I'm pretty happy with that position at the moment. That sort of is a slight change from where you were as of the end of September report. I think it's been confirmed that you're going to make a repayment of some debt in the next couple of days because of increasing confidence about your cash flow situation, which is good, which means I have less work to do from an interest rate risk management point of view. But again, the challenge that we have at the moment, or the challenge I have at the moment, is that if we're looking at rates starting in sort of 2029 going out to 3033, just the way that those longer term rates are and the way the yield curve is shaped, they're really high rates. So the less I have to do on that part of the curve at the moment, I welcome that really. And we've got some time on our side, but in terms of other questions, what we'll be doing is we'll be targeting dips in rates to deal with that sort of situation over the coming months, the coming year. And I think we're at the end of the presentation, so any questions? Throw them at me.
Thank you. And I just want to confirm also for the committee that you'll also see in that quarterly report compliance with our policy positions across the various policy areas that we have Treasury policy for. So we are fully compliant with our current Treasury policies as part of the assurance that we get. Happy to take any further questions. Any, Councillor Sunkel?
Thank you. Can you just, I guess, the theme of sitting in the floating or the short-term rates versus the longer. So the view is we stay in that short-term to floating as much as possible or as long as possible. And the advantage is staying there, even though the longer-term rates we might get caught with a higher rate over time.
Yeah, it's all about just trying to strike the right balance in terms of risk. So at the moment, post the repayment of some of the debt, you've got about 20 odd million or 23 million, I think it is, that are exposed to those floating rates, and you've got some deposits as well. So that kind of benefits. Well, in terms of the floating rates, you've got a reasonably good participation in terms of those low floating rates, which has been here for a while. But without trying to be too clever about it, again, we're just trying to strike the right risk. We're not an all or nothing type. The future is way too uncertain to make big bets in terms of this game. But in general terms, and I've made this comment before, we've been targeting yourselves to be sort of in the middle of the Treasury policy band. It's kind of like a risk neutral sort of position, and that's kind of where I stick with it. We're a little bit light in terms of the longer term hedging, but given the costs in terms of incurred in terms of going out there, I'm quite happy to stay towards sort of policy minimums there as much as we can. So I probably haven't given you a complete answer, but it gives you a steer in terms of what I'm and what we think.
Thanks for that. And I'm not trying to correlate my own thinking. It was just sitting in that space of, yes, we see the upswings in swap rates out of those times, and where's the point that you start to lock in or do something that it's, I think the advantage is still staying, as you're saying, where we are in the meantime and worrying about the future into the future a wee bit.
Just tactically, I thought something I'm interested in. It's not so important for yourselves, but just an example of some of the things that we look at. The last couple of years, for whatever reason, there's been some quite significant short-lived dips in some of the longer-term rates over that Christmas break. Now, it's actually really hard to put a logical reason behind it, but basically it has happened. So for some clients, and you're not one of them because I don't see you a need, but we're just putting some orders out over the Christmas break. So if rates do dip down, we can take advantage of that. But that gives you an example of the strategic and tactical things we're kind of looking for. And again, perhaps an example where perhaps logic sometimes doesn't normally apply, but you've got to look for market volatility and try and use it to your advantage.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robinson?
I think you've just answered my question. I just wanted to know the flexibility of the ability to be able to lock something in if things did change. So thank you.
Yeah, again, example, particularly the swap market, we can act virtually immediately, and it doesn't have to be a transaction starting today. For example, it could be a transaction starting December 29 going into December 33. So it's one of the nice things about the product's very flexible.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from committee members? I am happy to offer leave from the chair if any of the other councillors present wish to ask a question in relation to this, because it is quite a complex matter, but is there anyone who would like to ask a question? No? Okay. Thank you. Nothing further? Right, brilliant.
Thanks, all. Have a good Christmas.
Yeah, thanks to you, David, too, and thank you for you and your team and all the work that you do. Okay, the Regional Council remains compliant with its Treasury policy and borrowing covenants. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Okay, just conscious of time, and we do have a lunch that's been provided. I'd be happy if we took an adjournment for lunch now. We normally would take half an hour, but we do have quite a bit to get through still before 3 o'clock. Are people comfortable if we resume at 12:50? Okay. Thank you. We'll take an adjournment now and resume at 12:50. Right, good afternoon. Welcome back, everyone. Next item on the agenda is 8.1, the committee work plan and policy status update. And I'd invite Curtis and Grant to come to the table and talk us through the relevant paper, please. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou. So this is a regular update paper on the status of both of the forward committee work plan, but also the status of policies. There is a third item in the recommendations as it relates to procurement policies. So happy to take the paper overall as read. If there are any questions on the first two, the work plan and the policies, I'm happy to answer those. I'll also ask Grant if he wants to add some commentary around the procurement policy before we get into that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, very happy to take the paper as read. Do any of the committee members have any questions on the first two items in the paper before we talk about the procurement policy? Carolyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's more just a comment, particularly in relation to the corporate policies. And I note that there are a number that don't have current review dates. And I just wondered, in light of A, the recommendation from Audit, and B, the current circumstances facing ECAN, whether it might be prudent to review whether there is any reason for those policies to be reviewed in the next 18 months or so. The others have all got review dates that are coming up within what one would see as a normal time frame, but there are a number that currently don't have review dates, and I just wondered if it might be prudent to look at whether or not there was it may be that there is no reason to review them, but I think it might be prudent to simply consider that and record that it's been assessed in this time frame and a decision has been made that or not.
Thank you for the question. The short answer is yes. Thank you for the insight and yes. The slightly longer answer is that we've also recently reviewed our overall policy framework setting, which identified that exactly the point that you have highlighted there. So what, in addition to the tracking of individual policies, we are also looking at mechanisms to look at the overall suite, regularly look at the overall suite of policies, not only to test the timing, but also the ongoing relevance of those. So longer answer to your question, yes, and thank you for that.
Okay, very good. Any other questions then on those first two items before we move into the procurement policy? No, thank you. Grant, would you like to talk to the procurement policy, or draft procurement policy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd just like to introduce Nico, our procurement manager, as well. When we get into the policy itself, it's good to have Nico here. If there's any other more technical questions. Obviously, we had a policy in the past. It's not like we're creating something entirely new. We've largely just refreshed the policy that we have. We have looked at the updated procurement rules from MB. There's also new rules from NZTA. And we don't specify everything in the policy because obviously those areas are enormous. So we refer to them and they also constantly change and update. The other key area is te tiriti or waitangi, which is really in the social procurement side of things. So we have really beefed that section up to make it more current, whilst at the same time bringing in balance when it comes to being fair to all suppliers and following our rules. But obviously we have a unique situation where we work with Ngāi Tahu and our runanga as well, so it's recognising that importance. There are key procurement criteria. So as I say, te tiriti, quality, economic and ethical aspects, all those fundamentals are in there. And the next stage post this feedback would be to get Chief Executive sign-off and then roll it out and communicate it to staff. Yeah, so really keen to get some feedback and questions, basically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Robinson and then Carolyn.
Yes, no, thank you for this. I have just seen at the end, though, policy authorisation, and it's the United Nations Security Council illegal Israeli settlements. So that is clearly monitored as you run through different procurement strategies, or so it's monitored all the time rather than just quarterly or.
Yeah, it is a constant, and it's on our website too in terms of the listed organisations there. So yeah, it's a constant for us.
Okay, thank you. Carol?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to provide feedback. I mean, this is a core, procurement is a core tool for ECAN to discharge its function and meet the broad range of statutory responsibilities that you have. I've got quite a lot of feedback that I'm happy to provide offline that I think could strengthen the language and perhaps provide a clearer decision-making path, make it a bit more user-friendly. But I'm happy to go into that level of detail offline rather than take the time now.
Yep, that sounds ideal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sunkel?
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Just reading through the paper that's in front of us with procurement criteria, T2ET, two-year agreement, and then we have 2 lines on public value. And I guess the question in my mind is, how do we balance the public value with the social T2ET type consideration? Does public value always sit at the forefront, or how do we balance that? And there's the localism question, but again, it comes back to what is the public value? How do we, I guess, apportion our thinking?
Yeah, it really is a balancing act. I think procurement, there's a broad spectrum of aspects to it, which are all outlined in the procurement criteria. So it's really not a case of one thing or the other. It's taking that balanced approach, which does include public value for money, the quality of the service, making sure we're following ethical guidelines, not using immigrant workers in the wrong way, and all those awful things that happen. There's a lot of aspects to it. So it's really just that broad range to consider, and we need to take that into account in all of our procurement activity.
You happy with that, Councillor?
Yes, and I've read the principles that sit there. I was just really trying to get a little further into how we kind of balance. But
I think Carolyn might have a point. Some of the feedback Carolyn was suggesting she was going to provide, I think, might also provide some clarity in that regard.
Because one of my suggestions would be that I note the reference you've got to Section 14 of the Act, but Section 101 of the Act also directs you to operate to manage your finances prudently in the best interests of the future and current needs of your community, which I think provides that foundation for an inherent balancing exercise between financial prudence but acting in the best interest of future and current interests of your community, which means it's perfectly proper that the procurement policy doesn't say the cheapest option is always the best option, because you have a wider range of factors to take account of. And I think if we perhaps tease out that regulatory, but doing so in a way that is consistent with the broadest range of statutory responsibilities that you have. And I think you've got all the makings of it here. It's just sharpening up that focus and providing that foundation that would help decision makers recognise exactly the exercise that they're engaged in. So happy to have that conversation offline.
And thank you. That's what I was trying to get to. So I'm pleased you're in the room.
Okay, any further questions then before I put the motion? I'm happy for you, gents, to stay at the table, by the way, because you're going to be bouncing up and down a little bit. I think you're the next one on the agenda, so happy for you to hold there in the meantime. Any further questions before we put the motion? No? Okay, I will then put the motion, which is going to come up on screen. So the motion is that the Audit and Risk Committee endorse the Forward Committee work plan, endorse the status of the Council and corporate policies, and provides feedback on the draft procurement policy, acknowledging that the draft procurement policy will be finalised in accordance with the standard internal process for corporate policies, which includes the Chief Executive approval. So the further feedback, just to make that point clear, the further feedback will still come to the management team from some of the members of the committee. That's the motion. Thank you, Councillor Sunkel. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Thank you. Let's move on to 8.2, which is the assurance update and the internal audit rolling plan. And again, Curtis and or Grant, happy for you to talk us through, please.
Thank you, Chair. So first, it might be useful just to orient the paper a little bit, because there's a few components to it, just to recap what we're seeking here. So the paper seeks your approval of the internal audit program, which is set out in attachment 8.2.1, and to particularly focus your attention on the first page of that attachment, which sets out the proposed internal audit activities over a 3-year time horizon. The remainder of that attachment, which combined makes up the risk-based assurance plan, highlights a number of other planned and likely assurance activities that would be undertaken across that 3-year time horizon. The paper also provides the regular updates around progress on management actions, which you're familiar with, and also provides a report around the phase 1 of the payroll program, which I will ask our members of our People Safety Wellbeing team to speak to if there's questions around that. Just to provide a little bit further detail around the internal audit program and the assurance plan, which is the substantive part of the report. You may recall that in the past few months, we've particularly focused around the internal audit charter and the role of assurance and how internal audit sits within that assurance framework. We're pleased to see that approved at the last committee meeting. Clearly, on the back of that, there was a next area of focus around identifying the areas of internal audit focus for the coming period. What we have set out is that there will be a 3-year rolling plan of internal audit, in fact, of assurance activities. And that's laid out in the attachment for you. And the process that we've gone through to land on that is what we consider quite a risk-based program of activity, where we've identified not only the risks that we see today, but also potentially in the future for Environment Canterbury, but we've also overlaid a number of other factors, including what we are seeing across local governments, what we're seeing in the wider internal audit industry as well, and where some of those trends and hot topics are. What we foresee moving forward is that the committee will approve the first year of the rolling internal audit plan, at least annually, but we want to provide a visibility around what potentially year 2 and year 3 look like to give some sense of how this all fits together, but also acknowledging that we will likely see some regular recurring assurance activity as well. The other pieces to note is that the wider assurance plan, so the second page of that document, identifies some activities which may still come forward in terms of reporting to the committee, but it is really the internal audits, the areas identified that will form the core focus of reporting that the committee will see moving forward, in addition to that ongoing tracking and monitoring of activities that we've seen in the papers to date. The last piece I'd point out in terms of what you see in front of you in the plan itself is there's clearly a focus over the next, particularly the first 2 years of the plan, around some of those core financial and governance controls, which is very expected and very common across both local government, but also the industry more broadly at the moment. We do anticipate, and what you should see through the plan is that over time we build a balance of those core financial governance processes which remain, but also bringing in some of those elements of core service delivery that you would expect to see elements of assurance that the processes, the controls, the risks associated with core service delivery are being managed appropriately. So we do see that balance occurring over time. Happy to pause there, answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. And I think that's a very, very clear outline of the intent and the process of the plan for the next 3 years. For those council members that have been on the committee previously, or on council previously, you'll recognise that this is a really good step forward for us. There has been a lot of work put into the charter. This is the next natural step of that, which is to get a really detailed plan in place, as Curtis has suggested, just being very clear over the next 2 to 3 year period where the focus of the internal audit will be, with some flexibility to pick up emerging issues as they may arise. And as earlier and as described in the paper, there was a process around contracting out. The intention is to contract out external internal audit services to be able to execute this part or most parts of this plan. So I hope that's clear for everyone. Happy to take questions. Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you. And I haven't quite got clear in my mind the probable change within the organisation, whether it be in staffing and consenting and cost recovery and all those things that sit with income. Is that a risk that we should be looking through a risk lens, or is it this is something that potentially in 12 months' time we should be putting our mind to within this process of going, what are the 2031? What does the staffing look like? What does income look like? Where do those? It's a core, integral part of the business. So I'm just not sure whether it's something for us through internal audit, or whether it's something that gets looked through at risk or within one of the other committees of council. Do you have a potential view?
I do have a view, in that I think in some ways you've articulated the core challenge around, or opportunity around, both risk and internal audit and the interface between both of them. So the way I would answer that is, it's clearly a risk issue today, possibly moving more towards an issue. So we will pick that up and we will include it as part of our risk management framework, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. But there is a natural intersect between risk and internal audit for that purpose. So one of the reasons we've gone from a design principle of having a rolling 3-year plan is that we want to maintain that flexibility. Our risk profile will change over time, and so the areas in which you seek assurance around where the processes and controls are may change over time. That's perfectly natural. We also want to ensure that the recommendations that we are putting forward are truly risk-based. So as we get to grips with as things move through the risk management framework, and we get good processes and controls in place, a natural evolution of that might be then we test that independently. That's the typical life cycle. But coming back to that overall principle that we want to maintain some flexibility over that 3-year horizon in particular.
And thank you for that. And I think over the 10 years I've been here, we've always sort of had that slot available for emerging whatever. So I don't think it's something we need to investigate today, because we don't know what the future is. But I suspect within 12 months or 6 or 12 months, whatever, a greater understanding. So thank you.
Thank you. Giles?
Just wanted to add to what Curtis said, and the importance of the second part of the assurance plan that Curtis has presented today is a recognition that we would expect particular projects also to be thinking about the assurance requirements. So the relationship between the changes that are happening in consent and compliance, or potentially happening in those areas, the work that we're doing on Smart Enabling Regulator may well trigger our own assurance activities through that mechanism, as well as through internal audit. So the example would be the Holidays Act work. That project has deliberately scheduled 2 internal audits, or two audits of that process, to make sure that we have the assurance that that project is being implemented effectively. So there's a number of ways that we would capture exactly the issue that you're talking about, Councillor.
Okay, very good. Councillor Robinson.
Actually, hanging off the back of both of those comments, I guess with regards to sort of operational readiness and regulatory, if we do move from a world of consenting and we move into more permitted activities, that could see an increase of compliance and the costs associated with that, and state of the environment monitoring. Have we got that also within our sort of working plan and risk, I guess, heading forward? I didn't see that sort of explicitly mentioned. Thank you.
The short answer is yes, it will be part of our ongoing work in the risk space in particular. And I guess I'd emphasise that that is where that naturally gets picked up, in that conversation around how are we therefore responding. In a risk world, we talk about how we're treating that risk, but essentially what are we doing to manage that? And again, there's the flow-on effect to where and in what nature and to what extent would we ever be seeking a form of independent assurance, which is where internal audit comes in, around the way in which we are managing that risk. So I would come back to characterising all of this. One of those principles is we want to be as responsible and adaptive as we can, recognising that our risk profile is shifting. There will be some underlying and core risks that we are managing at all times, and that's where a lot of time internal audit does tend to operate, but we want to maintain that ability to flex and ensure that we're getting assurance where we need it based on the risks that we are seeing at the time. Yeah.
No, thanks for that. Do we have also the adaptability to shift the cost of compliance appropriately if we see a trend happening? Because consenting may be something that is no longer relevant, and who pays for compliance in that space, and the risk is still ours, but it might also be somebody else's. So will that be part of that strategy?
I think that's a big question. I'm not sure that's one I should answer in a internal audit assurance update. But to note that obviously there are a significant number of risk factors that are being considered at the moment. I think it's probably fair to say.
Yeah, no, I think the best answer I would have to that is that as those sort of issues emerge, from this committee's point of view, the question will be, what is management doing to assess what the impacts of those either regulatory or other environmental changes are, broader environmental changes are? How has the organisation been able to address what those changes mean? And from a risk point of view, it's being clear, okay, if that's the change that's been made, this is how we're going to address them. How are those changes being risk managed? What is the risk to the organisation? And financial risk might well be one of them, for example. So the question would be, what's the financial risk to the organisation now of this change? Management in the relevant part of the organisation should be adapting to those changes, recommending some changes to process, procedure, pricing, whatever it might be. The challenge for the risk part of the organisation is to understand, are those risks being properly identified, and then have they been properly addressed? And if so, then how could we maybe test them? And that's, again, that third, I guess, the option in that second part of the program where there is some flexibility. Should there be change and we identify risk and we want some assurance, there is ability in this program to be able to then deploy some risk assessment into there. So it's kind of us keeping evolving as the risk situation and landscape evolves with us almost, if that makes sense. Is that all right? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You said something yourself there that I didn't quite get my head around, that we heard earlier about how we were going to contract externally the internal auditing of risk, and you talked about that before the meeting as well, but I didn't quite understand it then. Can you just clarify for me as a new member of the committee, please?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So in the audit, generically in the audit space, there are what we call external auditors who are generally focused on our financial reporting and that level of compliance, and we had them today. For us, that's Audit New Zealand because we are a public sector entity. From an internal audit point of view, that's a separate program of work based upon the program that we've outlined, looking much more at compliance with policies and processes and procedures. There are two ways you can basically resource that. You could employ some staff yourself to undertake that work. So some organisations have an internal audit function they employ and have within the organisation, and we have in fact had that in the past here. Or there are some other external service providers you can contract to come into the organisation and do that piece of work. So they're doing the internal audit, controls testing, risk assessment, compliance type testing, but you've actually contracted it to a third party to do it as opposed to employing people to do it yourselves. And there's no right or wrong answer per se to which one you should use. Some organisations use a mixed model where they have some internal staff and contract some out externally. Some are wholly internal and some are wholly external.
And what's ours?
Well, we at the moment, the model that's been suggested is external.
And are they here all the time, or it's just come in and do checks sort of?
The latter. They'll come in specifically executing. So for each one of those pieces of the plan, there will be a more detailed scope of work that will be agreed and priced and then contracted accordingly.
And how often, roughly, do we get this auditing done? Is it once a year or?
Well, again, it depends on the program and the nature of what's being done. So Curtis might be able to talk more specifically about what's intended in this plan.
The intention is on an annual basis, we target 4 internal audits per year. So each of those being scoped, clear deliverables, clear timelines, and the committee receiving the reports based on the outcome of those internal audits. And the other thing I would add is there's really clear accountability, responsibility still maintained with management for both clarity, understanding around the scope and deliverables of the internal audit, but more importantly, the actions, recommendations that come out of it sit with management to progress. So there's the mechanism of how it's delivered, and then there's the ownership of the go forward.
Okay, so there's 2 audit programs. There's you guys who we contract to come and help us to manage ourselves from internally, and then there's that annual Audit New Zealand who comes and checks that our own processes of managing ourselves with your support are working.
Yeah, correct. And the Audit New Zealand audit is very much focused on our annual reports and both the financial reporting and the performance reporting. They're very focused on that, giving us an assurance statement on that. They don't do the same level of testing on our internal controls and on some of the more process-related controls, because that's not what they're giving their opinion on. Their opinion is really focused on the work they need to do to be able to give assurance on that annual report, the financial statement report and the performance report, whereas the internal audit is very much focused on specific areas of activity within the organisation. What are the controls, and are those controls really working as effectively as we anticipate they are? Because again, from a risk point of view, you have a risk in that area, you put in some controls to try and mitigate or reduce that risk. What you want to know is that those controls are actually working so that that risk mitigation is actually happening. That's effectively what this internal audit process does.
And then the external Audit New Zealand, thinking back to when we got audited, when I was a general manager, they then report back to Wellington-ish, isn't it? Their head office is sort of there.
So the Audit New Zealand are the audit arm of the Office of the Auditor General, which is a public sector entity we are legally required to be audited by.
Yeah.
So yes, they are, in effect, they are report back or complete their audits in compliance with the requirements from the Office of the Auditor General.
Kia ora.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, very good questions. Anything else then on the internal audit program, noting that it does have that additional targeted assurance activities before we move on to the assurance activity summary? No? Grant, you happy to move into that summary, please?
This is the insurance.
No, the assurance activity, 8.2.2.
I think we'll take, typically we take that as read.
Typically take it as read?
And
Okay,
if there's
that's
any
fine.
questions, happy to answer those.
No, I'm very happy with that. Thank you. Any questions then on 8.2.2? Did you? The other thing that is in the papers is the KPMG report regarding the payroll design review. Do we want to pick that up as part of this discussion? Giles?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we've had the first phase of the audit undertaken, which is a pretty positive review. The work is progressing well in terms of moving into the second phase of recalculation following remediation of the system. And KPMG will also be doing the second phase of their work in the first quarter of 26 to provide the Chief Executive with the appropriate assurance, and then it will be reported to this committee.
Great, thank you. As we know, that ongoing payroll compliance has been a risk for a lot of organisations, us included, so it's good to see that work being done. Thank you. Okay, if there's no further questions, then I'll get the motion provided, please. The motion is that the Audit and Risk Committee approves the internal audit program set out in the assurance plan, notes the additional targeted assurance activities that are set out in that plan, and notes the update on assurance activity and the assurance management action summary that was in attachment 8.2.2. Do I have someone who would move? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Someone to second? Thank you, Councillor Moody. Those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Moving on to 9.1, the Audit and Risk Committee Resolution Status Report. I believe that's you, Giles.
There was only one resolution, and the action has been completed relating to the annual report, which we obviously received the audit report on today.
Okay, thank you. That's pretty short and sweet. Any further questions on that particular point? Okay, I'll then move that we note the status of the previous resolutions provided in the Audit and Risk Committee Resolution Status Report. I'm happy to move that. Someone happy to second? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. All those in favour? All right. Thank you. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Next is the 9.3, which is the insurance renewal update. And Grant, thank you for staying at the table. And hand over to you, please.
Now it's time for insurance, yes. So this is our update. It's a noting paper to advise the committee that we have renewed our insurance as of the 1st of November. And just to be clear, that's all of our non-personnel related insurance cover. We do have other personnel cover, which is your income protection, which was renewed in June this year, and terminal illness cover, which will be renewed in, well, this month actually. There is a small reduction in cost, I'm pleased to say, which is about 6K, and that might seem tiny, and I guess it is, but I've had years of insurance increases. I don't know about you, but isn't this great? $6,000. Take the wins when you can get it. So that's good. Market pricing's improved, obviously. And there are some areas that we don't insure. and there's reasons for that. One is it's just not available. So flood protection insurance, very high risk. Not a lot of organisations or any wanting to cover that risk. And then cyber. Cyber has a very high cost. If you got in early some years ago and then renewed your policy, you probably did okay. But with the escalation in cyber across the world, just really cost prohibitive to insure for that. You're better off just fighting your own fight with that one. And in terms of flood protection, I did mention at a previous council meeting about this notion of parametric insurance, which is quite interesting. And Aon are working with various councils around the country to come up with a market offer for that, which basically means there'll be a set payout for certain events. So it's a bit like sum insured with residential property, where you name the price and that's what you get paid out, no more than that. Whether it flies, whether it happens, remains to be seen, but I think it's a really interesting development and we're keeping across that one. But aside from that, it's really a case of any questions people might have.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I've just got a wee clarity question regarding public liability. So under the sum insured, it says 30 million annual aggregate, 15 million per claim. So is that the aggregate? Is that for similar events that happen where you might aggregate the excess, or is it the total claims, or how would the aggregate model work in this instance? The reason I bring it up is that there's other councils that some may not have a certain level of liability like maybe we do, or the likes, and sometimes if we don't, it can fall on other people. And so I'm just safeguarding to make sure that that is how I read it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and there's all sorts of caveats and framework around insurance, but 30 million is the set amount for the policy year, and you may have a number of claims within that, so it just depends on what occurs. But 30 million is your cap overall.
Yeah, so just to be clear, it's 30 million of total cover in any given insured year, and 15 million cap on any individual claim. Yeah.
Aggregate. Is it not correct that aggregate is usually used in the term for insurance when it's a similar or likeness?
Yeah, so in this case, it's any claims under that particular part of the policy.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, any further discussion on that? Chair Swiggs was going to give us an update on some information I think he may have had or was trying to have with some information from the council up north, but unfortunately he's not with us at the moment under this part. If he joins later, I'm happy for him to update us on that. Anything else particularly on the insurance renewal? Just the only comment I'd have as the chair is that I understand the lack of cyber risk because it is expensive, or cyber insurance, I should say. But I guess it does also indicate the corollary to that is that we need to be absolutely watertight on our assurance that our cyber protection is actually operating as effectively as we can get it to be, given and there's always some risk in that space, but it does mean, I think, as an organisation, and Giles, probably look to you, for the assurance management can provide to council that we are taking all reasonable steps to make sure that our current cyber posture is as good as it can be.
We have an ongoing cybersecurity program that's managed by the GM of Digital, and we do regular activities to test compliance with our policy. So whilst we're never complacent, and it clearly is an area of increasing risk to all organisations, we believe we are reasonably well placed at this point in time.
And remind me, have we had any external cyber testing recently?
We do a regular external, I believe at least annually.
Right. Okay. I think it'd be useful for this committee to maybe know next time that occurs and what the results of it are.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, I'm happy then to put the motion, if there are no further questions, that we note the council insurance policies for material damage, business interruption, motor vehicles, public liability, professional indemnity, statutory liability, employers' liability, crime fidelity, fixed site environmental liability, travel and marine hull have been renewed commencing from the 1st of November 2025, and that we have received the summary of those insurance renewals. Do I have someone who would move that? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Those in favour? All right, anyone against? Thank you, carried. Thank you, Grant. He stays in the hot seat. 9.4, fraud, gift and hospitality registers. Again, paper is there. Grant, would you like to speak to it, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we do report these on an annual basis, and normally sensitive expenditure is in the mix as well. But having looked at the sensitive expenditure policy, it did look quite legacy and based on previous policy and previous ways of doing things. So we think we're better off to rethink that, give better value to it, and present it in March at the next meeting, taking account of the new sensitive expenditure policy, which has been fully drafted and it's being reviewed at the moment. So that will be good to bring to you in March. And just a question of any feedback on the fraud register or the gifts and hospitality register.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, I was just looking at the gifts register, and I think it's all very well and good to have a value in mind, like $50 or less, but there's another element of value, and that's in the influence value of who gives what to whom, and I don't think that is reflected here. I've talked about it already, so it's like I need the words. Just a moment. I guess it could be seen as something other than something that's worth value. It could be seen as influencing an outcome or a form of lobbying if we didn't watch it. And so there's a few in here, and I won't name them, but cause for concern, even though they might be worth not much. And so I think we need to actually revisit this and actually look at what has been handed to whom and the repercussions of that in the public-facing element of it.
So just in response to that, through the Chair, we do have our conflicts of interest policy, which is being worked on at the moment, and it does reflect koha and gifts as well as declarations. So I think, you're right, it's not just about the dollar value, it's about the underlying meaning of it and the context of it, which can be quite different. So we need to have the right wording along those lines to say, yep, it might be under $50, but have you considered X, Y, and Z? So making that clear. But we can take that on board with feedback for the sensitive expenditure policy, but also for the conflicts of interest policy.
Yeah, importantly, Council, though, they're actually due for review in January, so that this is a hot topic. This input can be provided right now for the policy review that's about to occur.
I agree. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Good timing. Okay, Councillor Moody.
Thank you. And useful to hear that the policy is going to be reviewed next month. When I read through the agenda, I was surprised to see that, to learn that we accept gifts. There's just so many different ways of looking at it, as Councillor Robinson's alluded. It's an emotionally awkward topic. And certainly when I worked for central government, it was simply the case that we were not permitted as staff to accept gifts over $50. So under, yes, okay, and that was looked pretty carefully at. Oh, you accepted that bottle of wine or that Christmas hamper or whatever, and you wrote it down, and that was the level of risk appetite. Definitely nothing over 50, of course not, Nick. And well, make sure you put it in the book if you got that $20 thing, and that's my what I come in with, I guess, as a benchmark. We'll all come in with different levels of what we're comfortable with based on our professional lives and backgrounds and what's seemed normal to us, but it seemed an easy way to deal with an awkward topic was just to say, just don't take it. We're independent, neutral civil servants. Either have no gifts or lower that cap, to 50 and record it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I know there are some other public sector central government organisations where zero tolerance for any gifts is the policy. So I think from my point of view, the policy is being reviewed in January. It'll come back to this via the management. It'll come to this committee, I'm presuming, for some input into it.
It is a corporate policy, but we can certainly arrange, as we've done with the procurement policy, to give visibility to this committee before it goes to the Chief Exec for approval.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. Just looking at the Chief Executive, are you comfortable if we put our eye over it? I think it's important for Council to have its sentiment, if you want a better word, put over that policy. So if that's okay, I think that would be an action that we'll have that draft policy brought to the next Audit and Risk Committee meeting, and that can be considered for any feedback at that point. Just a secretarial note, yeah, thank you. Okay, any further discussion then on the fraud, gift and hospitality registers before I put the motion? No? Okay, happy to put that motion, and I have a mover already. So Councillor Robinson's going to move that we receive the fraud register, we receive the gifts and hospitality register, and we note that both the fraud register and gifts and hospitality register are reported to the committee on an annual basis. We have Councillor Robinson move. Councillor Sunkel is happy to second. All those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you, carried. I do want to note too that this is an area, just out of interest, that Audit New Zealand do look at. They will look at, under the requirements of the Office of the Auditor General, they will look at our fraud register. They're required to. They do also look at our gift and sensitive expenditure policy, and they look for a compliance testing in relation to those areas. So these are areas that do get reviewed by our external auditors. Okay, 9.6 is the health and safety and wellbeing update, and I would welcome Kirsty McInnes to come, please, to the table and talk to the report that was included in the papers. Welcome, Kirsty.
Tēnā koutou, ko Kirsty McInnes, toko e Ningwa. No Tolaga Bay, mo Rangiora aho, tēnā koutou katoa. I would like to take the paper as read, but if anyone has any questions, I do have one piece that I can speak to that was raised this morning, but if anyone else has any other questions, happy to answer them.
You're absolutely happy to take the paper as read, but I suggest you talk to that now if you're willing to, happy to. Add that commentary now, and that'll head off the question potentially.
So when I came to probably, maybe not the last meeting, but maybe the meeting before when I spoke about the Health and Safety Act, I believed, possibly in my naivety, that it would be an easy solution to give you access to the Health and Safety Act. But I since found out that that isn't as easy as we thought. There are ethical walls between the council site and by our operational site. So we've been working with a principal information advisor and our digital solutions team to try and find a solution for being able to be able to report your incidents directly to the team. Unfortunately, that's not as simple as we thought. You do have a current process, which is that if you had an incident, you would report it through to governance and they would report it and it would directly come to us. So it's not off the table, but if we did set it up, it would set up two systems, which would mean that we would have to merge the information and then add it to our existing situation because of the two ethical walls. And we discussed at length around security issues related to people that aren't operational in our system. We are currently updating our incident reporting process, so it is still being looked at as an opportunity. We don't receive a lot of incidents from this group or from council in general, so we were also weighing up the cost of spending a lot of money externally to try and get that sorted, but it isn't off the table. We are looking at a digital solution at some stage in the future, and that may allow us to give you that opportunity. I will say, though, that if you do wish to come out on site with us or would like to arrange an event, I'm more than happy for you to go to governance and ask for support from my team or myself, and I'm more than happy to do that. I would love you to be more engaged in our work and to show you the work that we do. So you would see the app in action and be able to apply some of the principles as we move through an insurance process.
Excellent. Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
I'd like to put it out there. I'd love to shadow you in some of your work. So, yeah, that's a acceptance of an invitation, I guess. But, yeah, thank you. I can understand what, the concerns as well. But, thank you for speaking to it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions then on the health and safety and wellbeing report that has been presented? No? That was easy. No, one. Yeah, I do have one. Councillor Ward. Oh, he's going to move. Okay. Well, thank you, Kirsty. Comprehensive report, and everyone's happy with it. So, Councillor Ward has moved that we received the report on health, safety, and wellbeing. It's been seconded by Councillor Robinson. Those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Thank you so much. Very good. Okay, 9.7. Curtis, would you like to bounce back up, please? And we'll talk about the risk management update, including security. Here.
Kia ora koutou. So I'll take the report overall as read, and just firstly want to acknowledge that the topic of risk management is clearly live at the moment. It has never been more live, certainly in a local government setting, and acknowledging some of the conversations that have already happened as part of the meeting today. Speaking to the paper specifically, 3 points to highlight. One is that we have kicked off a process which we had signalled previously to take a refresh look at our strategic risk profile, the material strategic risks that will impact us as a council and a region moving forward. And you as elected members have been invited to engage in that process, and we look forward to bringing the results of that once management has had a good chance to have a look at it as to what that's looking like moving forward. That will dovetail in also in the new year with a refreshed look at our risk appetite. Those two pieces together become the really important foundations of the committee and the council's role in steering our risk management efforts at a strategic level across the organisation. The second piece is that we are well underway, well progressed in terms of operationalising our risk management framework, our refreshed risk management framework. And two things to point out there. One is that that framework will take a closer and a deliberate look at how we look at emerging risks and how they sit within our system of risk management, i.e. how are we systematically identifying, bringing those into scope and understanding what are we doing to address those emerging risks today. And the second one is that in addition to continuing to further embed conversation and practice around risk management at our executive leadership team and our management forums, we are establishing a group of senior leaders who will come together regularly, who will look across the organisation's operational risk profile. So we talk about strategic risk, but we hold a lot of operational risk across the organisation. And so we want to understand at an organisational level, what are the material shifts? And more importantly, what are we doing to address that? The crux of risk management at a system level comes down to where do we prioritise focus, time, effort, resource, whatever it is. So we're looking to lift that, elevate that in the organisation, and there's some good engagement around that today. The third piece I'd point out, because it is new in the papers, is that we are highlighting some of the broad trends and analysis from an ethics reporting perspective. It is a core part of our risk profile. We do have processes in place within the organisation for staff to identify potential areas of unethical behaviour. And so what we are wanting to do is to give some insight to the committee around the broad the trends in that space, but also give you comfort and assurance that we do have processes in place to manage those on an ongoing basis. So those are the three things I just wanted to point out, but happy to take any other questions you have.
Thank you. And look, thank you for the paper. I thought it was really good summary of where we're at and the journey we've been on around risk and then where we're planning to head going into the new year, which is really important as we mature our kind of processes around that. And I'd just like to thank you and actually Chief Executive and your team around the work you're doing in the current emerging risk space and collectively what we're doing to try and understand how we keep in front of that. So thank you on behalf of the committee to the senior leadership team for the work you're doing in that regard. Any questions of this? Councillor Robinson.
It might sound like a silly question, but no question is silly. That's what I've got to say. I guess the category or the criteria in which to categorise high, critical, and medium risk. What's the assessment criteria there? Could you maybe just tease it out for us newbies?
Sure. I always love the opportunity to talk about risk matrices and criteria. As you would expect, when you talk about the overall rating of a risk, you are talking about the combination of likelihood and consequence. Probability of something occurring, what would happen if it did. The consequence is the piece where there is clearly a raft of potential criteria. So there are consequence criteria categories which range from clearly financial, for example, but through to reputational impacts, impacts on our people, as broad as that may be, through to legal regulatory compliance obligations. There is a whole suite, and that's detailed in our risk management framework. The idea is actually it's the discipline of understanding and going through the process to understand what could happen and how significant could that be. And as you can imagine, with some of the risks that we deal with, particularly in the strategic space, they would touch on a number of those criteria. So the mechanism is designed to identify what is the most significant consequence that we could face that will inform what you would see in an overall rating moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Very, very good, very clear. Do we have any further discussion then on the internal audit, risk and strategic risk framework? One, sorry, yes, Councillor Moody.
Yeah, I found this probably the most exciting page of the book, so I'm with you on that. Would you care to say a few words about your thoughts on it? I mean, it's all here to read, but any commentary you'd like to offer, I'd welcome it. I can see obviously there's a critical, major, likely risk here around adaptability, for example, but wherever you want to begin, I'm happy to be guided.
I guess what I would say, rather than going through sort of blow by blow on the risks, is that the very nature of the risk environment at the moment is that it's more dynamic than it ever has been. And so where we are now is that we're taking a step back and understanding what are our current view of strategic risks. So what you see in the paper today has broadly remained relatively stable over the past 12 months or so. That's not to say that work isn't happening to manage those risks, but actually the profile itself from what you would see hasn't materially moved. What we want to do, which is part of good practice anyway, is to get into more regular rhythm of actually let's take a step back. Is that still the right mix? And before we get into, and so what are we doing about all of that? So I guess what I would say is there's a lot of activity that underpins what comes through reporting, even if the overall profile doesn't shift too much. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of activity across parts of the organisation managing that profile, both what you see and what the potential future profile is right now.
So you're sort of looking ahead as well as looking at now, and you're thinking about if some of these risks may increase in the future and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Councillor Caroline.
I can understand the confusion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just again like to acknowledge Mark's comments. I think this is a really good step forward, and I always think that the conversations that are generated by the artefact is more important than the piece of paper, and this gives you the framework. It did strike me that some of these risks are going to head towards the issue quite soon, and at which point, good luck. But I was really pleased to see that you've got yourself equipped with the kind of tools that you need to have the sort of conversation in the context that you're going to be navigating, because you can see that some of these are quite quickly going to become issues and they will be off the page into a completely different world.
Yep.
Sorry, just to briefly respond. Thank you for the insight, Carolyn. I guess one of the things that I would point out at the moment is, as the world of risk is, again, I'll use the term, so dynamic at the moment, the emphasis has to be on the quality of the conversation and the responsiveness over the artifact. The artifact is useful, but it's the people cultural element that is important, and that's the thing that I'll be looking to. And I guess from an assurance perspective, I want to acknowledge that the feedback and the support from particularly from the executive leadership team has been excellent in that regard. So I'm positive about where we're heading. It's going to be a busy time.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take leave from the chair for Councillor Faulkner to ask a question.
It's just a question in regards to the dashboard when it was populated, because things change pretty quickly.
Thank you for the question. You're probably an extension of some of the comments we've had. The initial dashboard was established more than 12 months ago. It's regularly reviewed, but I guess what I'm indicating here is we're now undertaking that process to step back and go, actually, let's look afresh, see what's moved, and that we get into a more regular cycle of not just how we're going on the things that we've identified, but actually, is that still relevant? What has moved so it becomes more dynamic moving forward?
Excellent. Thank you. Really, really good update and a very, very important part of the work of this committee and of the management team. So thank you, Curtis. Good to see the progress that we're making there and endorse. You're happy to move, yeah. Right. You're moving before you get a chance to put them up here. Okay, we'll receive the update on the Canterbury Regional Council's strategic risk and mitigations. Note the progress being made in implementing the organisation's risk activity plan, and note the updates provided and related to recent security matters and ethics reporting. I have it moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Ward. Everyone's jumping in. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Okay, 9.8 on the agenda was the committee chair's report. For those that are new to the committee, this was normally a section where if there was it's a bit of a catch-all for where there may be some other issues that are pertinent to the organisation but haven't actually come up otherwise in the agenda. In this particular report, you'll see it picked up on some matters which I think were relatively obvious to everyone in relation to the changes that are going on in the local government space, local government reforms, resource management reforms, etc. Given that I understand you're having a workshop on some of these matters this afternoon as a full council, I don't actually intend to have much discussion on this at the moment in this committee because I'm not sure it would be that useful, given you're going to be having a workshop on it anyway. Does anyone have any other comment they want to make on that, given that context? Councillor Moody?
Oh, just at number 4, that first line there, where it says the government has released proposals to simply local government. I wish. That should be perhaps simplify.
Yeah, correct. Correct, yeah, thank you. Okay, yes, that change noted. Otherwise, I'm happy to move that report is received. Thank you, Councillor Sunkel, seconded Councillor Ward. Those in favour? All right, thank you. Okay, that ends the open public meeting for today. And so we'll then pass a resolution to go into the public excluded part of the meeting. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. No, you can stay. Well, they can technically stay. I can give you leave to stay if you as councillors, yes, but staff will leave. Thank you. That was moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Sunkel. Okay, thank you. We are back in open forum, and I'd like to bring the meeting to a close and ask Councillor Robinson to close with a karakia, please.
Anuhia, anuhia. Anuhia ki te uru tapu nui o tane. Kia wātia, kia mama. Te nako, te tinana. Te wairua, e te ara tākata. Koe rā e rongo. Whakiria ake ki runga. Kia tina, tina homie, huie, taikie.
Kia ora. Thank you, and thank you everyone for your attendance and input today.